The man collapsed without making a sound. 1 second, he was reading a newspaper in seat 3A. The next, he was lying motionless in the aisle of the airplane. No one moved. Flight attendants rushed toward him. Passengers stood up in panic. Someone shouted, "Is there a doctor on board?" Silence. Another announcement echoed through the cabin. "If there's a medical professional on this flight, please identify yourself immediately." No one answered. I looked around. Hundreds of passengers, not one doctor. My heart was pounding because I wasn't a doctor either. My name is Ryan Mitchell. At the time, I was 31 years old, an ordinary project manager from Chicago. The only medical training I had ever received was a CPR certification my company required 3 years earlier. I hadn't used it once, not even during practice since then. But as I looked at the man lying on the floor, one thought kept repeating in my mind. If nobody helps him, he'll die. I unbuckled my seatbelt, walked into the aisle, and quietly said, "I know CPR." A flight attendant looked at me with relief. "Please help him." I knelt beside the man. His face had turned pale. His lips were slightly blue. He wasn't responding. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. For a brief second, fear took over. What if I did something wrong? What if I couldn't save him? Then I remembered something my CPR instructor had said years ago. Doing something is almost always better than doing nothing. I took a deep breath, placed my hands on the center of his chest, and started compressions. The cabin became completely silent. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths, again and again. My arms began to ache. Sweat rolled down my forehead. Every second felt like an hour. The captain announced an emergency landing, but the nearest airport was still nearly 20 minutes away. 20 minutes. It felt impossible. A flight attendant whispered, "Please don't stop." So I didn't. After what felt like forever, the man's body suddenly jerked. He gasped for air. A weak, painful breath. The entire cabin erupted into applause. Some passengers started crying. I leaned back, completely exhausted. The flight attendants immediately placed an oxygen mask over his face. As the aircraft began its descent, the man slowly opened his eyes. He looked directly at me. He couldn't speak, but he reached out, gripped my wrist, and gave it one gentle squeeze. It was his way of saying, "Thank you." At that moment, I believed I would never see him again. I was wrong. 6 months later, that same man would walk back into my life on the worst day of my career. The plane landed safely. Paramedics rushed on board within seconds. They carefully lifted the man onto a stretcher. Before they took him away, one of the paramedics looked at me. "If you hadn't started CPR, he probably wouldn't have survived." I nodded quietly. Then I walked back to my seat. I didn't even know the man's name. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at my apartment. There was no return address. Inside, I found a handwritten note. It read, "To the man who refused to let me die. Thank you. You gave my family something money never could. More time. I hope one day I can repay your kindness. A grateful stranger." There was no phone number, no signature, no clue who he was. I folded the letter, placed it inside my desk drawer, and went back to work. I never expected to hear from him again. Life moved on. My company had been struggling for months. Projects were canceled. Budgets were cut. Every week, another department lost employees. Rumors spread through the office. Layoffs are coming. I tried to ignore them. I worked harder than ever, stayed late, volunteered for extra projects. I believed hard work would protect me. I was wrong. One Monday morning, an email appeared in my inbox. Mandatory meeting. 10 a.m. My stomach tightened. Everyone knew what that meant. At exactly 10 o'clock, my manager closed the conference room door. He looked exhausted. "I'm sorry. The company is restructuring. We have to eliminate several positions." Then he looked directly at me. "Ryan, today is your last day." For a moment, I couldn't hear anything else. 5 years of loyalty, gone in less than 5 minutes. I packed my desk into a cardboard box, a family photo, a coffee mug, a notebook. That was all. As I walked toward the elevator, my phone rang. An unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Hello," a calm voice replied. "Mr. Ryan Mitchell." "Yes, my name is Laura Bennett. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Jonathan Hayes. I frowned. I don't think I know him. There was a brief silence. Then she said something that stopped me in my tracks. You met him 6 months ago. On Flight 247. My heart skipped a beat. The passenger, yes, he would like to meet you. The next morning, I stood outside a tall glass building in downtown Chicago. The address matched the one Laura had given me. The sign outside read, Hayes Medical Technologies. I had heard of the company. It was one of the largest medical technology firms in the country. I couldn't imagine why their CEO wanted to meet me. A receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. Mr. Mitchell? Mr. Hayes is expecting you. She escorted me to the top floor. The elevator doors opened into a spacious office overlooking the city. Standing by the window was the man from Flight 247. He looked healthier, stronger. The moment he saw me, he smiled. Ryan, it's good to see you again. For a second, I couldn't find the words. You look great. He laughed softly. Thanks to you. Jonathan Hayes invited me to sit down. I've wanted to meet you for months. I would have contacted you sooner, but my recovery took longer than expected. I nodded. I'm just glad you're okay. He smiled. My doctors told me something I'll never forget. If CPR hadn't started immediately, I wouldn't be sitting here today. The room fell silent. Then he looked directly at me. So tell me, how's work? I hesitated. I actually lost my job yesterday. His smile faded. I'm sorry to hear that. I shrugged. It happens. I'll figure something out. He leaned back in his chair. You know, most people would have stayed in their seats that day. They would have waited for someone else. But you didn't. You acted. Jonathan opened a folder on his desk. I asked my team to learn more about you. I was surprised. They told me you've managed projects for 5 years, led teams, and completed every major deadline ahead of schedule. I smiled awkwardly. I just did my job. He shook his head. No. You showed leadership. On the airplane. And throughout your career. Then he slid a document across the desk. It was an employment contract. I stared at the first page. Senior Director of Operations. The salary was nearly double what I had been earning. I looked up in disbelief. Mr. Hayes, there must be some mistake. He smiled. There isn't. We don't hire people simply because they're qualified. We hire people we can trust. And 6 months ago, you earned my trust before you even knew my name. I looked at the contract. My hands were shaking. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope again. But Jonathan wasn't finished. He smiled and said, Ryan, I have one more surprise for you. Jonathan smiled as he closed the folder. You probably think this job offer is my way of repaying you. I nodded. I assumed it was. He shook his head. No. If I were simply repaying a favor, I'd write you a check. This isn't charity. This is an investment. He leaned forward. I believe you belong here. Before I could respond, the office door opened. A woman in a navy business suit walked in. Jonathan, the board meeting starts in 10 minutes. He smiled. Perfect timing. He looked at me. Come with me. I frowned. The board meeting? Yes. I want you to meet everyone. 5 minutes later, I walked into a conference room filled with executives. Some had worked there for 20 years. Others were shareholders. Jonathan stood at the head of the table. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Ryan Mitchell, the man who saved my life. The room became completely silent. Several people stood up and shook my hand. One director smiled. So, you're the reason our CEO is still with us. I didn't know what to say. Jonathan continued. Ryan will be joining us as our new Senior Director of Operations. A few people looked surprised. Then the Chief Financial Officer spoke. He's highly qualified. We've reviewed his background. I think he'll be a great addition. Hearing those words made me realize something. I hadn't been hired because of sympathy. My experience had earned me the job. Saving Jonathan's life had simply opened a door. After the meeting, Jonathan invited me back to his office. He opened a small wooden box sitting on a shelf. Inside was the folded newspaper he'd been reading on Flight 247. I asked the airline to return it to me. He smiled. I've kept it ever since. Then he handed me the handwritten thank you note I'd received months earlier. I wondered if you'd kept it. I smiled. It's still in my desk drawer. Jonathan laughed. So did I. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said, "You know what I've learned from all this?" I looked at him. The greatest opportunities in life usually begin with one unselfish decision. I nodded. I couldn't have agreed more. As I prepared to leave, Jonathan stopped me. "Ryan, welcome to the team." I smiled. It feels good to have a new beginning. But I had no idea my biggest challenge at Hayes Medical Technologies was about to begin. My first year at Hayes Medical Technologies changed my life, not because of the salary, not because of the title, but because, for the first time, I worked for a leader who valued character as much as talent. Jonathan never treated me like I owed him anything. In fact, he rarely mentioned the day we met on Flight 247. He judged me by my work, exactly the way every employee deserved to be judged. 9 months later, our company faced its biggest crisis. A cyber attack shut down several hospital systems that relied on our software. Phones wouldn't stop ringing. Clients demanded answers. News outlets were already reporting the outage. Some executives panicked. One director suggested shutting everything down. Another wanted to blame an outside contractor. The boardroom was filled with fear. Jonathan looked at me. "Ryan, what do you think?" I took a deep breath. "We don't hide. We tell every client the truth. We work around the clock until every system is restored. And we take responsibility." The room fell silent. Jonathan smiled. "That's exactly what we'll do." For 72 hours, our entire team worked without stopping. Engineers slept in the office. Coffee replaced sleep. Everyone pushed themselves beyond their limits. Finally, the systems came back online. Not a single hospital lost patient data, and not one client left the company. A week later, Jonathan called me into his office. He placed a small framed photograph on the desk. It was taken by another passenger on Flight 247. It showed me kneeling in the airplane aisle, performing CPR. "I finally tracked down the passenger who took this picture," Jonathan said. "I wanted you to have it." I stared at the photo. I barely recognized myself. Sweat, fear, determination. In that single moment, my entire future had quietly changed. Jonathan smiled. "You thought you saved one man's life. But that day, you also changed your own." 2 years later, Jonathan announced his retirement. At the company's annual leadership conference, he stepped onto the stage. More than 1,000 employees filled the auditorium. He looked at the audience. Then he looked at me. "There is one reason this company has continued to grow. It isn't because of technology. It isn't because of profit. It's because of people who choose to do the right thing, even when no one is watching." He invited me onto the stage. The audience stood and applauded. Jonathan shook my hand, then quietly said, "The world needs more people who act, instead of waiting for someone else." I smiled. Looking across the room, I realized something I would never forget. The greatest opportunities rarely arrive because of luck. They begin with one ordinary decision: to help someone, expecting absolutely nothing in return. Thanks so much for watching. If this story kept you hooked, hit that like button and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join the channel for more unforgettable true stories every week. Click one of the videos on your screen to keep watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay safe and take care.